Thank you to MOCA for hosting this. I am Brian Barsana. I'm Assistant Curator and Manager of Publications here at MOCA. And I'm extremely excited to hold the second in a series of panels titled Uncommon Commons. I want to thank our panelists once again and Brian Dang for helping put this together. This panel and the one that preceded it and the one that follows are our desire to talk about public art at a time when public art is more important than ever. As many of you know, especially those of us that are watching from Los Angeles, we are still under county ordinance to make sure that we are keeping our museum public safe and keeping them out of our indoor spaces for the most part. So we thought it was a really opportune time to talk about public art and what's happening around them, what interaction there is between art and the community, and to think about how the urban landscape is changed by public art. So in that effort, we are hosting a series of panels. Today's panel is really a discussion of, once we know what site we have, how do artists, how do art commissioners, how do curators approach our relationship with the community, right? Like, how is it that we make a piece of public art responsive to its community, received well its community, and reflect the community in which it is? So I'm extremely excited to welcome our three panelists today, Judy Baca, Oscar Hisa, and Leigh Gorey. I'm going to read some short bios, and then they are going to do presentations around either a project or an idea or a method that they've been using to tackle the issue. And after that, we'll have a short moderated discussion. We'll just ask some questions. And the third component is a Q&A. So if you guys have any questions, make sure to use the Q&A function or just drop it into the chat and we can deliver it to the panelists. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce each of the panelists. We have legendary living legend Judy Baca with us. She is one of America's leading visual artists. Dr. Judith Baca has been creating public art for 4 decades. Powerful in size and subject matter, Baca's murals bring art to where people live and work. In 1974, Baca founded the City of Los Angeles' first mural program, which produced over 400 murals and employed thousands of local participants, and evolved into an arts organization known as the Social and Public Art Resource Center, otherwise known as SPARC. She continues to serve as SPARC's artistic director and focuses her creative energy in the UCLA at SPARC Digital Mural Lab, employing digital technology to promote social justice and participatory public arts projects. She's an emeritus professor of the University of California's Los Angeles, where she was a senior professor in Chicano studies and world art and cultures departments from 1980 until 2018. Leigh Gorey is an arts manager with the City of Los Angeles Department of Culture Affairs, Public Arts Division. Leigh manages a multi-tiered arts program for DCA in partnership with the Los Angeles World Airports, featuring temporary exhibitions, performance, special initiatives, and new commissioned public art and conservation projects. She created the art program for the new Midfield Satellite Concourse scheduled to open summer 2021 at LAX. The inaugural exhibition presented by a local curator from the Underground Museum will feature artists working in video, sound, and new media. Leigh received a Master in Public Art Studies degree at University of Southern California, a bachelor's degree in psychology at University of California, Davis, and is a certified permaculture designer trainee from the Permaculture Institute USA and the Permaculture Academy of Los Angeles. And finally, Oscar Hisa is the Director of Learning Engagement at the Institute of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles. She creates and produces programs for museum and community audiences with focus on social action. Prior to museum education, she taught art in France and in the Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District. In fall 2019, she was the lead curator of Current LA Food, a public art triennial with the City of Los Angeles' Department of Cultural Affairs Public Art Department. In winter 2020, she was a visiting professor for UCLA's School of Art and Architecture to teach a course on learning and engagement in contemporary art museums. In winter-spring 2020, she organized ICLA to be an official vote center for the presidential primary elections. During COVID-19, she initiated the field workshop action projects at ICLA with 10 short-term residency projects between January and September 2020. She received her BA from Barnard College and her National Diploma of Art from the École des Beaux-Arts, France. She lives and works in Los Angeles. So with those introductions, I want to welcome everyone once again and welcome all our participants. we're going to start off with Judy. So Judy's going to share her screen and tell us a little about her projects. Thanks, Judy.
Okay. Let's do this magical thing here in which I screen share. And tell me if you're seeing my screen. Are you? Okay. And you're still hearing me? Okay, all is in order here. Well, there's a fascinating subject, and it's been the sort of center of my work for all of my art career, because I actually began as a public artist. And my interest has always been to bring work where people live and work and into community settings. I actually did not begin thinking about museums or galleries or public spaces that were the kind of boxes that actually contained art, but what would happen if I produced work that went into public settings and then related to communities that I knew and that were actually related to my experience of being an Angelita, born and raised in Los Angeles. I was actually born in Watts and raised in Pacoima, so I have this like history of the sort of range of the city of Los Angeles. So I thought I'd just show a couple of pieces that quickly to give you kind of an overview, and then when we get to talking about it, we can talk about some of the issues that came up in making these pieces. This is a piece at Garrison, the Central American Research and Education Center, and it was developed in the 1980s. And in the 1980s were a period of time in which there was a large influx of Central American people, particularly into the Pico Union area. And I had already begun the Great Wall. I'm going to show you a little bit of that process also. But the question really was how would you create a work that actually was about this story of people leaving El Salvador or Guatemala and coming under terrible war circumstances, and also deal with the second generation. These are young people seated at the table, are the children of people who left their homes because of the war in El Salvador primarily. And what you're seeing behind them is a timeline. And many of these photographs are things that they took from their family albums and brought to the table. And what developed was a sort of fascinating story of what was going on between one generation and another generation for the creation of a public artwork in this Central American and Research and Education Center. And what we began to find was photographs like this that were brought from the family albums. And these photographs were collected over a period of time by the young people. And the question was, how do you create a mural with so many of these images that were terrifying and overwhelming images? And this was an unbearable image. And my computer didn't want to turn it, but things like this. The image before was a mother and child that were murdered by the El Mano Blanco, and this them at their deathbeds. That was somebody's grandparents. This was an image, probably last image of people who were disappeared. They're set out of here on the streets, and people who probably were never seen again after this photograph was taken. The people moving from during the war, another image that was from that period. And the question was really, how do you deal with this kind of imagery? And what became a kind of controversy between two generations. On the left are people who have been disappeared. On the right is actually a really interesting image of a woman who survived the El Mesote massacre. And you can see that the helicopters are named as US helicopters. And here's the junta that is in the field here. And this woman running, this is her drawing. And the drawing was so raw and so much at the sentiment. I decided that I would use these works directly in the mural. So part of the digital lab, which is this new development that I've been working on for the last number of years, bringing muralism or the techniques of muralism in relationship to technology, so that actually it's possible to use first source materials, no longer using them as an image to make a drawing from, but actually in some cases preserving the first source of that material within the work. So what came about was a production called Migration of the Golden People. And this is actually the central image that was selected by the community for the piece. And this was the first work in which I had really no direct relationship to the content or the story. And so I was completely in the position of being a listener and being a facilitator with the young people and with their parents. And the young people were very concerned that their parents were bringing him into this information and this story that they really didn't want to live with. They didn't want to see this, all these images of death and terror, and yet the parents were saying to them, this is why we left. This is our story, and so it became this tension between two generations. And so part of this thing was mitigating not only the use of this content, but also the relationships between two generations. It was sort of a kind of a notion of holocaustic information. So this piece, this became the Migration of the Golden People. It's about a 35-foot piece by 18 feet. And it was assembled with both photographic content and also drawings that were done and paintings that created the information. So there was a question about how do you deal with, for example, the dead. 75,000 people were murdered in El Salvador. So you can see here behind Rigoberta Manchu is all of these little calacas in the ground, and they representing the dead. The people who are being disappeared are moving into a village. The helicopters are in the sky, and these are people leaving. And so this was the story of the migration of the people, the Golden People, coming to Los Angeles and leaving their home country. Faragundo Martí, Constance Ayala, Sandino are in the mountain as the part of the eruption. So this is how we mitigated that story and kind of created a focus on the leaving, but also told elements of the story in a way that were bearable. Here's the final version. Interesting aspect of that is that even to the very last minute, in this images in the background here, you can see the, apparitions on the buildings in the Pueblito. And those were people that were disappeared, and people came at the last moment and said, you must include these people. You can't tell the story without it. Let's go the other way. That piece actually in the 1980s was really formulated and informed by the Great Wall of Los Angeles mural, which has been a life's work for me and is now a half a mile in length and has been a narrative of an alternative American history. Although I have to stop saying that because it's now been declared a National Historic Site. And so I guess it is the American history. It begins on the banks of this river. This is probably what the river of Los Angeles looked like at one point. Of course, the Los Angeles River was destroyed, and I talk about this as being the hardening of the arteries of the land. And so part of this notion of history and story and how you deal with the controversies related to it has to do with first excavating the place, the land, the site. So I begin always with the land having memory. In the previous work, it was not that particular land, but their homeland. And in this case, in Los Angeles, it is the Los Angeles River on which the city was founded. Well, something like 51 miles of river were concreted in and disappeared. So if you can disappear a river, how much easier is it to disappear the stories of the people? So here's a look down the narrative work as it currently is. There's about 700 feet missing in this particular image, ending here in the post-war baby boom of the 1940s. But this story is really a story of the recovery of the information about people who are really the people of Los Angeles. We are some 72% a city of color. We're 47% Latino. And that's little known in terms of the kind of tourist information you get about Los Angeles. So my metaphor for this site was the tattoo on the river, on the scar where the river once ran. So in a sense, it's about metaphorically the healing of the river and the recovery of our stories and the capacity for people to begin to own what their families contributed to the building of America. So the river began with the prehistoric times and early California, in which we discovered that the trees that we think are trees to Los Angeles, palm trees, are not native. We discovered that the original peoples. And we began the creation of a park on either side. This is with the Army Corps of Engineers, and them trying to mitigate the circumstances of doing some, something like 30 years of concreting, and then finding that that wasn't necessarily the best idea for the river of Los Angeles. So the river of Los Angeles began to look like this. It looked like a huge concrete channel. And this is our sort of encampment as we developed the mural segment by segment. Over 400 young people worked on it, most of them from the juvenile justice system, most of them in poverty. And the narrative unfolded segment by segment. And what is really important in terms of talking about how you work with people is that we brought people who lived through particular historical experiences. We also worked with historians and did analysis of a particular era of history. We mitigated all of the kinds of things that would be objections to these things. And then we began to create a narrative that really focused on women and people of color. And we call this the imaging of content. And for some reason, part of the images are not coming up. This is you can see here in the next slide, the trains, and these trains actually are beginning the massive deportation of some 500,000 Mexican people in the 1930s, in a time in which the sentiment against immigrants built. These became the blueprints these are 2 feet to 2 foot squares. And this is a segment which actually takes the newspaper exactly as it was written. Officers hurl back alien horde, talking about the Mexican people and this massive deportation. It's the only place in Los Angeles where you can see this story recorded and made visible, and a point of communication. Today, we are working on the next segments. We've finished to the 1950s, and we're developing the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, all the way through to 220. It'll be really interesting when we get to the Trump era to be doing a translation of that. And we are building this bridge, which is an interpretive green bridge. It's made of refuge from the river. It will be about lighting up the Great Wall so that it's recovering a space at night. The bridge will come over the top of the river, and the mural will be actually represented on both sides. And you can cross in the middle, and a lot of the material that is on the bridge is refuge from the river, and also the original plant life and animal life of that region. So that's the story of the Great Wall, and a methodology that was developed at the Great Wall that I've applied to all of my work. I think I'll just end with that, and we can go on.
Thanks, Judy. That's amazing. I just wanted to mention a couple things. So people can go and see the Great Wall right now, right? They can.
Well, it's actually a lot more. This is part of a kind of perfect outing for the pandemic. You can safe distance walks, and we are starting the lighting. It will be coming up in the next months, and it will be a safe place to walk at night with the lighting. So we're actually creating a place that is really going to have more usage and more interest, particularly with the reckoning of public monuments in America, people's desire to have alternates to what people call the lost cause monuments of General Lee and various other, genuflecting to slavery in the United States. This is really the alternative view. It looks at women, it looks at the indigenous people, it looks at the LGBT community, it looks at African Americans, and all of the stories of their contributions. And it ends in the 1950s. And we're reckoning with that. We're going to move it into the 60s, and this will be perhaps one of the most interesting eras for me to interpret with my teams, because that's one that I will have been a conscious artist living through. Without it being, yeah.
And it's in the valley, right? It's in where is it?
It's in the San Fernando Valley, in a place they call Valley Glen. It's alongside of Valley College and on Coldwater Canyon. So you just can jump off the freeway at Coldwater and go north, and then you can get on the bike trail or walking trail at Burbank and go a half a mile.
Amazing.
the narrative alongside of you.
Great. And if I can do a small plug, MOCA will be working with Judy on a project, an exhibition in 2021. So we're extremely excited about that. It's going to be incredible. And I should also mention that Judy is having her retrospective at the Museum of Latin American Art in Long Beach. So it's 2021 is going to be the year of Judy. So we're really excited and congratulate you on this amazing project.
You will be, I would just say you're going to be able to see the working drawings of the Great Wall at the opening of the Lucas Museum, the Narrative Museum.
And the Lucas Museum, like, oh yeah. Thanks again, Judy. So great. We're going to jump to Oscar right away.
Okay, well, Judy, that's incredible to hear. I've heard your story, I've visited the Great Wall, but this is wonderful to hear about the next dimension of it. It's an honor to be joining you and Leigh, and thank you, MOCA, for inviting me to do this panel. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see how this works. Can we all see? Okay. All right. It's so nice to have the opportunity to go back into one's work and look at things that have been done over the years and pull what projects and programs that are relevant to the topic. I have worked in museums, that's been my career, and I've been doing the work of education and learning and engagement throughout those years. For those of you who do not know, the Institute of Contemporary Art Los Angeles was formerly the Santa Monica Museum of Art. The museum has been a non-collecting art institution for over 30 years. And we were in the downtown area of Santa Monica and then in Bergamot Station, an art center in Santa Monica between 1988 and 2015. And then we opened in downtown Los Angeles in fall of 2017 as the Institute of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, ICALA. And so we have a freshness because we're new as ICALA, but we have an incredible history of exhibitions and programs. And that's what I'm going to review. I've selected 3 projects. In a physical scale, we're not as big as MOCA or many of the other larger museums in town. However, that does not and should not stop us. We've often looked outside and we've actually seen, sort of checked out what's happening outside. And conceptually, there's a real interest in what museums are doing in the 21st century, how we can exist beyond our walls, and how we can present in different ways. So as I said, I managed to pick 3 projects and I'm going to go through them in about 18 slides and try to coast through all of their stories. These are projects that put art in the public sphere, and unlike the traditional definition of public art, all of these projects were temporary. They were existing as exhibitions in the open arena as opposed to in a museum, and they existed amidst the realities of the world. So one of them worked with the school community. So I'll be talking about how we worked with young people, working with youth and teachers and a roster of illustrious artists. And then one worked with high school students, teens, and international artists and neighborhoods. And then the final project that I'll go through is the one where we worked closely with the city of Los Angeles in creating public art in public parks in the city. So first slide. This is a program called Wallworks. And what you're seeing is one installation out of many that we have done over the years of 2002 to 2014. This is sort of my foray into public projects. It was an objective to bring art into the classroom and expose young people to art making with an artist. And like many dedicated museum education departments, we wanted to fortify the idea that art is an important pillar of learning in schools. The reality is that art is often in jeopardy of being cut or just never gets the resources. So there's very little art in the schools. I mean, I applaud all of the art teachers who are working in the schools, but it is always a struggle. So this is one of our projects that was done with the artist Laurel Consuelo Broughton, and the project was called Black Holes. This is in a public hallway at Bergamot Station that is used by tenants and visitors. Previous Wallworks projects were at the Santa Monica Place Mall near the 3rd Street Promenade. And if you can imagine this hallway without the artwork, I'm sure you can see just a white corridor, sterile and joyless, and something like Wallworks changed all that. In order to bring an established artist into the classroom, I produced short videos. These videos would feature a studio visit and then a hands-on lesson plan, and it would be on camera. It would be like a cooking video, and it would teach the young students how to make the artwork. And the video would be included in a kit where you would have all of the art supplies needed in order to make the artwork. And then once they would watch the video, in the case you see in there in the image, there's Frank Romero, they're watching Frank Romero talk about his work, and also then tell them how to do the project. And then you have the kid having a great time with the art supplies busted out, and they know exactly what to do. And teachers are so great because they'll take it to the next level and connect it to other parts of the curriculum. So the short videos were in there, the supplies were in there. We would distribute this to many classrooms and then the artworks would return to us, and we would install them like any of our exhibitions with a professional crew, and then unveil it with an official art opening and have it on view for many months. We have reached over 10,000 youth over the years with 24 artists. The early projects would have had perhaps like 60 to 80 students, and then we became more ambitious and we had about 500 students per project. I'm going to try, I hope this works. Let me know if you can hear. It might be a little choppy at the beginning. Can you hear it? It's having to stop. I know it does.
Santa Monica Museum of Art is a creative contemporary space with a mission to provide unique experiences through its exhibitions and education programs. This museum is proud to bring you Wallworks. Wallworks is a project where the museum, an artist, and classrooms get together and collaborate to make a large-scale public artwork. Many classrooms and groups are involved in this exciting project at one time. Your teacher has received a Wallworks art kit, where everything you need, including this video, is there for you to help you make your part of the bigger artwork. As in a puzzle, each student will contribute a piece. The final artwork will be assembled and installed as an exhibition. It will be on view for a couple of months and enjoyed by many, many people. Thank you for participating. Now let's meet the artist and create Wallworks.
Okay, that's my broadcast voice. Cracks me up. So I have to try to get out of this Vimeo. Okay, I'm back to the PowerPoint. So here we go. So we did over 24 projects, about 24 projects with different artists. And this was the hallway. We had other sites, but this was the hallway that we did most of the projects. And we did a rotating about twice a year, all of these public things. And it was wonderful. I mean, we certainly had a lot of success with the school district, with families, with young people learning that it is a museum project, but it's also a public art project, and just an incredible history now of exhibitions. It won a recognition from the State Superintendent's Office of Public Instruction for excellence in museum and school partnerships. And I will say this was the first time I forayed into video as a means of communication and engagement. And just to give you some context, when we started this, we were using VHS tapes. And then we went like, wow, DVDs, and now we can do things digitally. So it's all really an evolution, but technology has always been something that we've used resourcefully with whatever means we have, but it's been very effective over the years to consider video. And now that I think about it, this kind of a project would be great, you know, to have kits for schools, because I don't know what the schools are struggling with all the Zoom, but they need to make art. So next this is some stats of what we did. This is the list of artists we had involved over the years, incredible projects and incredible people. Now we're at ICALA, and I'm going to focus on this one project that's called Maybe Some of Us Will Change This. It was one area that we also work with, a community that we also work with at ICALA is teens, the teen audience. We've done programs over the years that expose youth to the possibilities of the creative sector, or we simply involve them in really unique projects, and this is one of them. In 2018, I was approached by the Flax Foundation, which was the French Los Angeles Exchange Foundation. It was a program, an ongoing program that had residencies for artists based in Paris, or actually based in France, and then they would come to Los Angeles, and there would be this incredible exchange going on and production of exhibitions and projects. And their curator at the time, Anna Milon, approached me to see if we could do a project with some artists who were based in Paris. That would be Stephanie Rollin and David Brognon, and their duo name is Brognon-Rollin. And they have a singular approach to art making that invests deeply in the community that they are working in, with all consideration sort of discrete embedding into the community to understand it, and then create conceptual pieces that are also beautiful portraits of the challenges of our world and our state of humanity. So maybe some of us will change this. Took place actually in spring 2019. That's when it was exhibited. ICALA has been working with a local high school across the street. It's a continuation high school called Metropolitan High School. If you don't know about a continuation high school, it's a kind of school where the students are in a catch-up mode and trying to gather credits in order to graduate, having been removed from their regular school environment for whatever reason. These are very bright students. However, they struggle and they juggle. So they went into Metropolitan High School and started to audit classes, get to know the students, and just sort of be flies on the wall, if you will, and also just talk to the community of people involved with the school, as is their process. One of the things that sort of stopped them in their tracks was this wall of essays by the students about justice. And there was a specific phrase that said, maybe some of us will change this. And that resonated with them as a sort of sentiment of the time. If we go back to spring 2019, there was a heightened rhetoric against migrants and immigration, and there was a heightened level of intolerance and incredible talk about the border wall. And all of that is still, of course, very present, and we've had 4 years of this, but that particular time was incredibly tense. You could feel it among the student body. And so they isolated that phrase and thought we could create a project around this. In their past collection of projects, they had done work with sound. One particular project I liked that they had done with a school community was with a whistling language that came from the Canary Islands called Silbo. They actually researched and found another whistling language called Mazatec, and they used that as a way to start researching further, because it was about our relationship with Mexico, and they wanted to do more of that. Juxtaposition. So the Oaxacan whistling language of Mazatec is an indigenous form of communication from the agricultural region of Oaxaca. And whistled language is designed to travel beyond the average distance of the spoken word. So it goes melodically through valleys and through thick fog and mountainous regions from farmer to farmer. And this is the message. This was a method that they thought this is going to work. We'll be able to use this. So through more research, and they had to enlist another collaborator in this project, Antoine Bertin, who came in from France to work on the sound piece, he being an expert in binaural audio recordings. So he was on hand for that sound part. And then through our collective research, we found an educator named Leigh Garcia in Oaxaca, in the hills of Oaxaca, who actually teaches Mazatec, the language, the whistling language, and is a defender of the language because it is at risk of dying out. So with Eloy, they connected, and we worked with the school, introduced the idea to the students. The students were able to start learning about this language, and they Skyped with Eloy. And eventually that phrase, maybe some of us will change this, was translated into Spanish and then sent to Eloy to be translated into Mazatec. And then what happened was this is all process and a beautiful step in the process where Eloy Garcia from his town of Huatla de Jimenez came all the way. He flew on a plane for the first time in his life to Tijuana to meet us at the border to whistle back the phrase. So it went from downtown LA to Oaxaca back to the United States across the border. And the idea was that the sound, this beautiful language that could be transmitted could just go across the border and it didn't matter. The border doesn't stop it, a wall doesn't stop it. So they recorded it, and that was recording number 1. Here's some Polaroids that were part of the exhibition. I hope this works. I'm going to show you a video. So that's the phrase by the student that was translated into Mazatec and whistled back across, and the artists are on the other side of the fence. This was recorded on the Mexican side by Eloy's friend and sent to us. So that was the moment when it was captured. It was a windy, overcast day, so that's why there was so much sound there. But that became recording number 1 of the project. And then, then we had the students learn that phrase in Mazatec. And they learned it, they were practicing, and then Antoine recorded this sort of collective chorus of them learning this phrase, the phrase that came from their school. And then in that instance, recording number 2 was of the students, but then they embedded this whistling phrase, this whistled phrase, into the school's bell system. So at Metropolitan High School, instead of that strident, stressful bell that signals time to get into class or time to go to lunch or time for recreation, they put that Mazatec phrase that they had whistled. So here's another.
Good morning, Metropolitan faculty, staff, and students. Today we're going to listen to the Mazatec whistling program that we all been recording. Have a wonderful day. Good luck.
So that was part of the school for a while. And then that was the second recording. This is the third recording. So in their research, the artist noticed that there was an ice cream truck depot on 7th Street. So ICALA is on 7th Street, the school is on 7th Street, and across the bridge, there's a parking depot of all of the ice cream trucks in the city, it seemed. So they went there and for them, that was this incredible way to diffuse this sound piece. And they negotiated with a few of these ice cream truck drivers to integrate the whistling language and whistled phrase into their playlist of their ice cream truck. And these ice cream trucks circulated the neighborhoods, often the neighborhoods from where these students lived. And so here's the third sound piece. So that would circulate throughout. Our exhibition was from spring. So throughout the spring months, it would be in the area. It was getting hot, and in the summer, it was also playing in the neighborhoods. And there were many people who were from the Oaxacan community that recognized that this was the language, not just some whistling ditty. And so they thought that was interesting. And then the ice cream truck drivers had little flyers to describe the project. And some kids would say, well, that's not the usual Mary Had a Little Lamb. And he said, yes, and if you learn it, you'll get a free ice cream. So there was just all this community excitement around this project. But then it's just great from oops, sorry. And then, oops. Being told that I'm going on too long, sorry. So the final, let me try to get to the next slide without this key. So that's the installation of it. Okay, so the final one, and I think Lydia could even talk about this a little more, but Current LA Food was the public art triennial that we did with the city of Los Angeles. It was proposed over 6 years ago as an idea because there was a contest through Bloomberg Philanthropies, and we sort of proposed this idea of an art and food project. Now, art and food is not something new, but you know, as Santa Monica Museum of Art was looking to go downtown, we were sitting there going, well, downtown's a very exciting place and it's changing rapidly. I'm a native Angelino as well, and I have roots in downtown Los Angeles and East Los Angeles, and it's like, this is all very, very rapidly changing, and it's not the LA of my youth. And when we were coming down with the hottest restaurants, and yet you also had food insecurity and hunger in Skid Row. So these differences were happening right in the area where we were going to open. So hence Current LA Food was sort of the result of all of our thinking. And so we created the idea of Current LA Food, worked with the city of Los Angeles in this triennial, which they had already started with the theme of water. And there were a number of projects that were presented. I'm not going to go through that video because I'm just going to go through quickly the projects. This is Jasmine Orea. These were in 15 public parks in 15 council districts with 15 artists and 15 public programmers. The public programmers were either artists or arts organizations. We had over 80 programs in the month of October. And it was just a very, very full project. And I think engaged quite well, because food is something, as I would quote Raul Cardenas of the group Toro Lab, it's what sustains us and it what connects us. So this is the artist Rocklin, who did a musical theater performance and a bronze sculpture in the park. This was at Barnstall, one of the public programmers that was doing something around food and what we would do when the big one hits. How do we prep for that? And this was a project by Emily Marchand, who is doing an 8,000 square foot quilt and a project for our homeless community. So I think that's it. That was just and people could take parts of the quilt. So it was an incredibly ephemeral piece.
Thanks, opportune. I think it's really interesting. I did not think of public art as a sound installation, or I guess I had not thought of that in a while. It's something like temporary, but also that could stretch out into all the other parts of the city. So that was really, really interesting, especially working with schools. We're going to jump to Leigh in the interest of time and dive straight in again.
Thank you. Let me see. Okay. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, MOCA. Honored to be here with Oscar and Judy. Today, I'm going to present on a proposed project. This was developed as part of a permaculture course that I participated in earlier this year. And the premise of it is thinking about the site for art opportunity as more as part of a larger ecosystem that really encompasses the community and a bunch of other layers that I'm going to get into. And for this presentation, it really started off with this question that I've been in my head about how do we foster reconnection in times of growing disconnection. And just to give you some context, permaculture, it's a very contemporary term, but of course it has ancient indigenous roots. And it's basically the design, development, and ongoing care of ecosystems to build sustainable and self-sufficient communities. This will manifest traditionally in agriculture, farming, and natural building. So when I started this research a couple of years ago, and particularly with this course, I found that there were certain parallels in our public art process that we implement through the City Department of Cultural Affairs, and then also the permaculture process. So the three that stuck out to me the most was whether you're an artist or arts professional or a designer, the process of observation entails watching these natural systems over a period of time and really acknowledging the other forces interacting with a site or a community. Inherent to that process, the shared process, is this relationship building with community stakeholders, and again, acknowledging these existing interconnections. And what manifests is site-specific art and design that responds to unique qualities of the land, history, current residents, the flora, fauna, environmental conditions, socio-cultural and political layers. So through this proposed project, we called the Los Angeles River Commons, my cohort and I really started off with this vision for this site, 4 tenements, connecting our past to our present, connecting people to land and nature, fostering civic pride, and fostering environmental stewardship. So we looked at the bow tie at the LA River, which is this very iconic parcel and that a lot of people are familiar with. It's adjacent to the Glendale Narrows, mainly concrete, but there are lots of native and transplanted plants at this site. And through this research and through our site visits, let's see, oops, I think there you go. We basically took the entire parcel and redesigned containing certain components. We designed water treatment and management. This image here shows a detail of our design, which contains natural constructed wetlands that actually purify the water coming from the LA River and catching rainwater when it does rain. We had amorphous gardens and habitats, mainly supplementing the landscape with more native plants and still nurturing the transplants that are still there. Also creating habitats for pollinators. And so I won't go through the whole list, but this is some of the elements that are contained in our design. But I'm highlighting today is really our community engagement and education programs. So on site, we proposed of constructing 2 community engagement centers that would serve as welcome centers and hold dedicated workshops. Programming included art, cultural science, ecology, urban agriculture, conservation, recycling, composting. We would work with local and non-local educators, indigenous leaders, scientists, artists, historians. This place also doubled at night as a rental space therefore having some income to feed back into the community center. And itself was designed to be a physical demonstration of green architecture, particularly adobe building. But this place would also house a repository of information, history on the bow tie park, the native flora and fauna that people would see as they're walking through the site, and the site's restoration efforts. We also wanted to highlight social service resources because there is a small but significant transient population there. Have it equipped with some information on shelters and community resources, and have mobile outreach services come to the park when needed. So early on in our research, we noticed that there is a school, Sotomayor Learning Academies, right across the train tracks from the bow tie. And there they have the Agri-Science, Ecology, and Art program. So I met with Reyes Flores, the teacher of the Agri-Science program, and Arturo Romo, Fine Art. They have been working for years in this way and have a dedicated farm on site, and of course, a tricked out print studio. So we found that we had similar, a shared vision in our interests and passions, and particularly for the bow tie, which a lot of their students were using through the years. So we developed a program where they would, we designed 4 labs or dedicated sites on the bow tie that'd be specifically for our educational exchange program between the LA River Commons and the students. And it would culminate in a 1-year curriculum where they would farm these living labs, and at the end, it also manifests as an artwork or performance. And then as part of the exchange, the LA River Commons staff would go and also bring workshops to the students at their school, thereby creating, an educational experimental dialogue. So here you see a detail of our community engagement centers. There's the 2 art centers here, and then these 3 circular sites, demo sites. And there's a 4th one here in close proximity to the centers. My PowerPoint's lagging a little bit, hold on. Let me try this one more time. Okay.
You can pull it up. You can try and pull it up.
Yeah, sorry, it seems like it's pausing on my computer. Okay, great. So the design of the art centers are there. Now, what does this have to do, next slide please, with public art, particularly with the municipal public art, is that as Oscar had told you, it's very new for us to really engage with educators, youth, and elders, particularly Indigenous elders who are often seen in their communities as wisdom keepers, and really giving this education down to the other generations, the younger generations. Also the transient population that is very rare for us as well to engage with. This kind of model really does rely heavily on relationship and community building. And then of course, bringing a lot of interdisciplinary fields together to work on a shared vision and project. And in particular, this model also really focuses on environmental restoration, regenerative agriculture, and public art as all vehicles for change at one table. Next slide, please. And again, going back to this model and this particularly proposed project, it really is a metaphor for LA where natives and transplants can coexist together. As you see here in some of the plants found at the bow tie, the native white sage and the transplanted Mexican palm. Next slide, please. And so what does this mean for public art? Right now, we are engaging in some very initial development and research on how this model can be implemented into our daily project process. Next slide. So that's pretty much it. And with gratitude and reconnection, that's what I hope for moving forward for all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, Leigh. Thanks to all the panelists for showcasing different and really interesting ways that you engage with the community, you know, and I think that from, you know, people within school or children within schools to, you know, calling forth histories, whether it be through individuals like Judy or through different community stakeholders, I think these are all different, really interesting ways to make the artwork that ends up in that space much more relevant to those people that are there. I'm just going to pose one quick sort of point for discussion, and then we'll move to the two Q&As, two questions that I think came in during our Q&A. And I pose this question for any of us, whoever wants to take it, but I think one of the things, or what we hear about the most in public art especially, is like where things go wrong, right? Like what happens, when in the process does something go awry? And in your opinion, maybe we can start with Judy, like when does public art, or what is the point where it begins to fail its public, right, in your estimation? I think you're muted, Judy.
Here I am back. I guess my experience with failed public art projects in terms of work has been more about censorship. And, you know, the less, I think the degree to which at least the degree to which I have been engaged with community groups and worked really closely with them, as I showed in the Caracen project, the Central American project, in a sense, there was a bit of tension in which I got caught between two generations telling the same story. There was a story of both generations, essentially why people came to the United States. And so the difficulty was trying to mediate that, trying to figure out how the youth could understand their parents' point of view and the parents could understand the youth point of view, and we came to a compromise in the imagery. But more often, what has happened has been the problems with those people who are sponsoring, those people who are the administrators of public art have been the problems, you know, in terms of permitting systems or systems that have to do with getting approvals. And that has to do with like agreements made. I'll give you an example of work with USC, for example. I was producing a work on the history of Latino LA for USC. And they formed a committee for the review of the work. And the review of the work was to occur after the designs were done. So all of that, and I was working with students, and we developed maquettes for the production. And it was all approved. And that approval went through a committee, and people were very happy with it. There were some suggestions, but by and large, there was no censorship. And when it became real, and they began to see that it was actually going into production, authorities above the committee that had been appointed, from all the way to the president and vice president of the university, decided that those images had to be changed. There was images that had to be changed. So the censorship came after the agreement about how the work was to be done. And so that was very, very difficult, because at that point, the mural almost stopped. And one of the things that actually worked in my behalf was that a film was being made about the process over a year's time. And the film, which was, I think, sponsored by the Annenbergs, it was, you know, quite a production. Them tracking the work on a regular basis. And as a result of that, it would have been way too controversial for them to make me change it, or for me to be fired. But it was very close. There's a wonderful piece about that I did. It's called East of the River, and it was a show, East of the River, in which I annotated the design with the statements of the administrators. And that work actually has more currency than the final mural itself. It's been everywhere in the world because I wrote right on the drawing, you know, and there was a goddess figure in the earth, and she has the border in her back, and the administrator said, "Why is the goddess so angry?" I said, "Well, someone hammered the border in her back." There was another image that said, you know, like, what are these Indians doing in a Latino piece? And I said, my response was, and I annotated it, "You mean you really don't know?" I was doing this sort of sardonic response, which was kind of fun because I really realized that it was not going to be censored. It just couldn't be at that point. Um, and the piece actually got sold in an auction for the preservation of Rudy Cunha's legal fund, as he was suing the university for the demise of Chicano studies. So it was perfect. It was perfect. So in other words, yeah, censorship is our biggest problem for me.
That's really interesting. I'm gonna go into asking one of the questions that came in that I think is really interesting, and whoever wants to answer it. I've noticed many of you using the term "we" instead of "I." I'm wondering what came first for you, this emphasis on communal making or the necessity of collaboration?
May I answer that?
Yeah, please go ahead, Leigh.
I think through my experience working in public art and just being attracted to this field over 15 years ago, it did come from more of a collaborative perspective. My background's in social services. That's what I started off as an educator and a counselor, and it grew into, you know, really trying to go into the arts and culture sector. And for me, collaboration from, you know, from the other end of the commission agency to the team, my internal team, to the artist team, to this community, it just kind of came out very easily, not easily in the sense that there's a lot of folks that you're interacting with in these communication styles, but it's always inherent. That collaborative process is inherent into the field. And I think people are attracted to that if they, in the first place, and they stay with it. So that's always going to be there. And I do think it's an important part of the process.
I could say something about that too. I just jump in there for a second because I don't think actually public art began as a field in which there was a we at all. It was really very much, you know, you think of the large public art projects that were, you know, GSA sponsored at the federal level. And essentially they were, you know, like the placement of fine art works in plazas, you know, like that began to be like sculptural works that could be in a much more appropriate museum in which the artist had no relationship to community. That's really where public art began. That's where, in my early career, that's how public art was thought of. And even Los Tres Grandes, the great Mexican muralists, were people who were sponsored by the federal government, and they were led by a solitary male artist whose vision was placed out into the public. It became much more a public interactive action as time passed and as we began to really question who the public is and how the public changed over the years. And there had to be a relationship to getting something up because people began to react against works that were put into the public sector. So the we is a fostered thing, and actually smarter in the sense that it gives you the possibility of seeing your work from beginning to end and it not being stopped before it's put up. Because if you simply walk into somebody's neighborhood and you put something up and they don't know, that's the very last thing you want to do. You want to ensure failure, don't speak to the people before you paint something in their communities.
And I can certainly echo the need for we. I think that when you enter, I'm in the museum space, and if I don't see something that is connecting to the community I feel that I'm a bridge, you know, in order, as an educator and someone who connects and faces the public quite often, is just sort of a bridge role. And I think more and more bridges need to be built in these arts organizations and in community connections, because there's just too much separation.
Great.
I think we've come a long way since plunk art, but we have a long way to go still, you know.
Yeah, there's definitely a long way to go and a lot more discussion to be had about this. I think I'm going to end it there. I wanted to thank everyone again. I think this was such an important conversation, and it's one that I think is going to be generative in a lot of different ways to a lot of different people that are involved in the arts. I wanted to thank you guys again. And also, I forgot to mention at the top of the presentation, to thank the Sam Francis Ford Foundation California, who supports our programs. And also just mention that while we will not have one of these panels happening in December, we will pick up the topic again in January and continue to talk about public art. As long as we can't go inside, we're going to keep talking about the outside. And I think there's a lot more to be discussed. And I thank you all for the people who joined us. Thank you people who are running the Zoom, and wish you all a good evening. Thank you all again.
Thank you.